Hello viewers, welcome to Newsweek South Asia, a program that talks about breeding of terrorism and its impact on South Asian nations. Let's begin with the headlines first. Kashmir faces deep threat amid emerging use of IED for terror attacks. Security forces foil attempt by Pakistan smugglers seize narcotics worth 300 crore. And Taliban kill at least 10 Afghans working for Mine Clear agency. Frustrated by repeated failure in carrying out large-scale terror attacks, Pakistan-backed terror groups are now adopting new tactics to unleash chaos and violence in the region. In recent months, Indian security forces have recovered several improvised explosive devices in the Kashmir Valley. This repeated and steady detection of IEDs points to a dangerous trend that should be probed thoroughly, and the perpetrators should be brought to book.
In the past couple of months, several attempts to carry out attacks against Indian security forces in Kashmir have been foiled. The credit for these foiled attacks goes to the alerted security grid, and it also points to a flourishing human intelligence network that is primarily responsible for such detections. However, in many of these attempts, security forces have recovered improvised explosive devices, which are a sign of something dangerous brewing in the dark underbelly of the valley. The latest discovery was made in the Tral area of South Kashmir's Pulwama district, where a major tragedy was averted after security forces detected and defused an IED, which was weighing about 6 kilograms. These incidents have forced the security agencies to work out a strategy to deal with IED blasts, as using these devices to target security forces is a low-cost affair for the militant organizations.
Some of the people were trained by Pakistan ISI and infiltrated to this side. Now what has happened is that these IEDs, being improvised explosive devices, are made very easily, and the people who have the knowledge of doing it, till such time they are not brought to book, these sort of incidents will keep happening. Therefore, it is very essential to track down all these overground and underground workers in the Kashmir Valley, so that all these threats of IEDs and others can be eliminated.
The militants in Kashmir change their modus operandi every year. In 2020, they were attacking Naka parties, and this year they are relying more on IED attacks. The militant handlers across the border are desperate to boost the morale of their cadres, and IED attacks have been the strategies to inflict more casualties on security forces and create news. Therefore, various videos providing instructions and introduction of such devices are being dubbed in Kashmiri language. At a time when the security agencies have got a complete hold on the ground situation, it is surprising that the perpetrators are able to find the materials and the mechanism to carry out IED attacks on security forces.
Making an IED is not very difficult. It can be made from very common materials which are found even in a household. That could be sugar, that could be other materials, a watch. All these things are there mixed with some gelatin or some explosive device that is also available at the quarries or the other places. So that is how an IED is made. But the problem is that till such time, these people who are experts on making the IEDs, they are not identified and not brought to the book, this threat will always remain.
Because they are improvised, IEDs can come in many forms. Sticky bombs are one of them. These are small IEDs and quite powerful. The bombs are particularly worrying because they can be easily attached to vehicles using magnets, potentially allowing militants to carry out assassinations or target military convoys that regularly crisscross the valley. Hence, security forces in Kashmir are redrawing their standard operating procedures and also advising the general public not to leave their vehicles unattended.
sticky bombs that were discovered which were dropped by a drone in Jammu and Kashmir area is quite worrisome, because in Afghanistan the Taliban has been using these to carry out attacks which are on various installations by sticking these into the cars and into the other vehicles, or even just the cars that are parked on the roadside. Therefore, it is very essential that a complete overhauling of the system, that is right from, you can say, the borders till the hinterland, to prevent the income of these sticky bombs from drones or even otherwise, because once these are in the hands of the militants in Kashmir Valley, it will become very difficult for the security forces to really find out and really counter them.
The region of Kashmir has seen a consistent flow of weapons and technology from Pakistan. The illegal flow of technology to the militants has given them an advantage. It is thus important for the state forces to compete with the militants' means and ease of technological procurement. It is only with this technological advantage that Indian security forces would be able to further deter the ongoing infiltration, weapon supply and youth radicalization in Kashmir, and therefore contribute to lasting peace in the region.
Moving on, Pakistan, which has failed miserably at subverting peace in India's Jammu and Kashmir, is now trying to hit the nation from different corners. To support and finance its nefarious activities, it is trying to push in drugs to facilitate terrorism in India. In a recent development, Indian security forces busted a huge narcotics terror module at the Rajasthan-Pakistan border. Our report. Unable to disrupt peace in India through its nefarious designs of sending terrorists and weapons, Pakistan has now resorted to narco-terrorism. Recently, Indian security forces seized at least 56 kg of heroin, the largest ever amount recovered along the India-Pakistan border in Rajasthan, after foiling a narcotics-smuggling attempt by Pakistani operatives. Previously, in March 2021, the Indian security forces in Rajasthan foiled 2 infiltration attempts at the Indo-Pak international border in Bikaner, killing 2 Pakistani intruders. Security forces seized 247.54 kilograms of heroin in the first 5 months of this year. With the most recent seizure of 56 kilograms, the recovery has surpassed 300 kilograms.
इन्फॉर्मेशन थी, हमारी इंटेलिजेंस ब्रांच जो थी वो एक्टिव थी और 10-15 दिन से वो जो है इस मौके का तलाश में थी कि ये लोग कब ऐसी कोई हरकत करें और उनको हम पकड़ें। हमें जो है इन्फॉर्मेशन मिली कि साहब इस एरिया से जो है ये क्रॉसिंग हो सकती है, बट जिस जगह पे हम लोग वेट कर रहे थे वहाँ ना करके दूसरे जगह पे इन लोगों ने अटैम्प्ट लिया और पाकिस्तान से जो है जो हमें खबर लगी कि साहब एक गाड़ी भी 1 बजे करीब जो है जीरो लाइन पे गई थी।
To keep the terror machine running, Pakistan has been using narcotics as a major financing tool. While it has been pushing trained terrorists into Indian territory and also deadly arms and ammunition besides fake currency, narcotics are being pumped into Indian territory to reach Indian markets like Punjab, Delhi, Mumbai to generate money for terror operations and recruitment. It has emerged as a profitable venture for terrorist organizations who have suffered in the recent past due to freezing of their bank accounts and dismantling of hawala money laundering networks.
When you want to keep things off the books, the sources of income, of course, you can transfer formal money to terrorist accounts, but then that creates a linkage. And the whole point of it is you want your hands to at least seem clean when an audit is done. And that is why drugs as a source of terror funding start off very early. And they also found that transporting drugs as a mode of payment was a lot easier than actually transporting cash. Because, you know, when you transport cash, it raises a lot of questions when it goes cross-border. Whereas when you transport drugs, you can, it's seen as relatively benign and you can actually co-opt border guards and checks and balances through bribery, usually in kind.
Pakistan-based narco-terrorist networks have stepped up their activities on the Indo-Pakistan international border and are making incessant attempts to push intruders, arms, ammunition and drugs into India. Narcotics are generally trafficked into India through the border states of Gujarat, Rajasthan, Punjab and Jammu and Kashmir. Even the COVID-19 pandemic did not deter drug smuggling from Pakistan. Jammu and Kashmir police recovered 36.08 kgs of pure heroin, 240.7 kgs of hash and 49.7 kgs of brown sugar from different parts of Kashmir Valley in 2020 alone. Meanwhile, Indian Border Security Force BSF last year made a record 517 kg hauls of heroin, which is the highest seizure in past 5 years in Punjab. Several news reports have revealed that ISI is using many pro-Khalistan militants based in Pakistan for smuggling drugs in India to fuel terror activities in Punjab while destroying the youth with drug addiction.
This policy, Punjab today has one of the highest drug addiction rates, and this is almost a direct consequence of what happened after the Khalistan movement. So this has been a part of their strategy almost since the strategy itself, the terrorism strategy itself started. Narco-terrorism seems to have always gone hand in hand with terrorism, period.
Use of narcotics for terror funding by Pakistan's ISI is being seen as a trick to avoid being traced back. But to its much disappointment and humiliation, even the narco-terror network of Islamabad stands exposed now, as the Indian security forces have upped their arms against Pakistan-sponsored terrorism at all fronts. The air of deep uncertainty that has for so long dominated Afghanistan does not seem to disappear soon. Violence, including attacks on civilians, journalists, human rights activists, judicial workers, has increased in Afghanistan, even as the United States has begun an operation to withdraw all its remaining troops over the next 4 months. In a recent attack, terrorists shot dead 10 mine clearers working in Afghanistan's northern province of Baghlan and wounded more than a dozen.
At first sight, streets in Afghanistan look similar to the roads found in other Asian countries. Fierce activities in the streets go on, and they represent daily life in Afghanistan. But something makes these streets different. Here you can expect explosions any minute. There is an increasingly uncertain security environment in the country. It is hard for common Afghan people to feel safe in public places. Civilian casualties in Afghanistan witnessed a sharp rise since peace negotiations started in September last year, and there is no guarantee that foreign troop withdrawal will bring to a close the far longer conflict that has ravaged Afghanistan for 4 decades. Over the past 6 months, shadowy assassins have murdered journalists, human rights activists, judicial workers, doctors, clerics, and common people. Amid the wave of targeted killings, recently again some masked gunmen shot dead 10 mine-clearing workers in Afghanistan's northern province of Baghlan and wounded more than a dozen. Violence has surged in Afghanistan since the US began to withdraw its last troops on 1st May. The departure of international troops comes amid a deadlock in peace talks between the Afghan government and the Taliban. Despite the February 2020 agreement with the US in Doha, the Taliban never stopped from using violence. Hence, many experts see the Afghanistan peace deal journey as a road to nowhere.
The road to nowhere, this particular statement hides the real danger that Afghanistan is in. this is a road to anarchy. What we are seeing is a building up to the days in the 90s, from the mid-90s till the time that Taliban took over, where there will be complete chaos, where foundations are being laid to balkanize Afghanistan, where you will have several groups fighting each other, and when the Taliban finally comes and takes it. The Taliban is basically laying the foundations for its takeover.
Such opinions are understandable, as the Taliban, after all, are no ordinary armed group. So turning the words into action would be challenging. When the future of Afghanistan is at stake, regional ambitions of a country also threaten to tear the nation apart from the outside. Yes, regional ambitions of Pakistan, a country that has always supported Taliban and its proxies. Recently, a political party in Pakistan also claimed that several mosques in Pakistan are collecting donations for Afghan Taliban.
Donations in Pakistani mosques to help the Taliban, I don't think is a very big thing when it comes to finances. The finances obviously will come from somewhere else, and they'll be considerable. They'll probably come from the Pakistan deep state. This movement in the mosques is basically to mobilize opinion, possibly to get certain volunteers for this particular force. So what is going on is a Pakistani attempt to ensure that the Taliban enters Afghanistan with as little resistance as possible, and this particular Taliban is as much as possible under the influence of Pakistan.
Observers say that the US administration should carry out an honest review of the entire peace process and push the Taliban to make concessions. The talks are crucial to find a lasting solution to the Afghan conflict, but it should not be on the Taliban's terms, which could wipe away whatever little progress Afghanistan has made in the last several years. And the growing influence of Pakistan in Afghanistan also needs to be stopped, as Pakistan's secret agencies' links with the Taliban is undeniable.
In order to put an end to the menace of terrorism, it is essential to break the chain of terrorism financing and money laundering. Pakistan, which is considered to be the epicenter of these terror financing chain, already features in the grey list of Financial Action Task Force. Now, the Asia-Pacific Group on Money Laundering has retained Pakistan on the enhanced follow-up status for remaining requirements, and Islamabad will continue to report back to it on the country's progress to strengthen its implementation of anti-money laundering and combating terror financing measures. Our report. Pakistan's notorious spy agency ISI has a long history of involvement in supporting and promoting terrorism in the name of Pakistan's geostrategic interests. However, the country continues to mislead the international community through several farcical measures to hide its devious activities. But in reality, it continues to sponsor and aid terror organizations on its soil. It is no wonder that Asia-Pacific Group of FATF, the global anti-terror watchdog, has retained Pakistan on its enhanced follow-up list and asked Islamabad to strengthen its anti-money laundering and combating terror financing measures. Although Pakistan is now compliant or partially compliant with 31 out of 40 FATF recommendations, there still remain some serious deficiencies in fulfilling several parameters of terror financing and money laundering.
Terror financing is basically the fuel to continue with the terrorism. If there is no money and if the flow of money is stopped, the terror industry doesn't work. Pakistan is a terror industry by itself, and the military as well as all the terrorists, they work for money. They are not working for any other cause. This enhanced list is basically because Pakistan would have taken up a case that we are compliant on some of the issues which FATF had given.
The latest decision by the 41-member APG comes a few weeks ahead of a full-fledged meeting of the FATF to review the measures taken by Pakistan so far on the issue of terror funding and money laundering. Pakistan has been on the FATF's grey list since June 2018 and finds itself isolated internationally on the issue of terrorism. At its last plenary meeting in February 2021, FATF retained Pakistan in its grey list and urged the country to complete an action plan to counter terror financing before June 2021. Ahead of every plenary meeting of the FATF, Pakistani administration ensures to hoodwink the world by taking some pseudo-anti-terrorism steps like arresting a few terrorists. This time, Islamabad has put measures in place to ensure such offences are investigated by specialized agencies appointed in their favour.
But what they are going to actually do it is that near FATF, when the dates are closing in, they will put some terrorist in jail and then take out later. They will change the names of some terror organizations so that they can be funded differently. And they will do such tricks to avoid the sword of FATF hanging on their head.
Questions about the counter-terrorism financing measures put in place by Pakistan still remain, as the UK recently included the country in a list of 21 nations at high risk of terror financing and money laundering. Besides, a recent report by the United Nations suggested that a significant part of the Al-Qaeda leadership resides in the Afghanistan and Pakistan region, including the group's leader Ayman al-Zawahiri, who is probably alive but too frail to be featured in propaganda. Meanwhile, several reports suggest that it continues to provide access to funding of the NWSA-designated terrorist groups, including the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed. Because of such duplicity and deviousness, Pakistan is facing the difficult task of clearing its name from the FATF grey list. And with that, we come to the end of this edition of Newsweek South Asia. We will be back next week with more news, views and analysis from the subcontinent. Meanwhile, do keep writing to us at nwsa@anin.com. This is Yeshi signing off on behalf of the entire production team of Newsweek South Asia. Goodbye and take care.